welcome to Design Notes. I'm Liam Spradlin, and this week I talked to Roman Nurik. Roman's a design advocate at Google and has designed and developed apps for Android like Dashclock widget and Muzei live wallpaper. Since Roman's knowledge spans design and development, he wears two hats that one rarely wears together. So in this episode, we discuss the designer-developer relationship, why everyone should be able to give design input, and the rapidly mutating future of contextual apps. Let's get started. So I guess, first, what do you do?
What do I do? That is an insanely tough question to answer. So professionally, I mean, like I do design, development, all sorts of stuff, but work at Google. I've been doing design advocacy for a while. I guess like 6 years, 5 years, I don't even know. But like ever since, Android started getting really popular, I started, actually joined the Android team back in 2009. I realized that there was kind of this void. Nobody was really talking about design in Android. It was almost like two words that didn't really fit in the same sentence. And I thought, why not? Why doesn't somebody just, start doing good stuff in this area? And so I started doing that, and that's kind of what started my quote-unquote design advocacy. So I've been doing that for a while. But most recently, I kind of switched over to a formal kind of design role. On a team I can't really talk about, but I can talk about some of the challenges we're encountering. But I still do some design advocacy. I still obviously care deeply about Android. Definitely something that I'm going to continue kind of, doing along with Nick and Chris, Nick Butcher and Chris Baines, and a bunch of the other folks that are out there that are doing awesome stuff, like Mike Denny and so on. So I guess it's kind of a hard question to answer. I guess on the side, I mean, I do all sorts of stuff in the space of design tooling and like just experimenting with things, just a lot of web and CSS and JavaScript stuff, just hacking around. So I guess that's probably the best answer I can give.
Cool. And you're not just a designer, but you also make pretty incredible apps as well. How do you do it?
Thank you. So I guess like my background is in engineering and also a little bit of design, but like I guess I've been doing programming for slightly longer than I've been doing design work, but like about a year or two. So I've always, I guess, had this kind of dual focus and dual passion. I guess way back when, I don't know, this is in like maybe the early 2000s. I was kind of messing around with, I don't remember if even this is the right word for it, but it's like proggies and like little like hacks for Windows. And I started kind of doing some UI work. And so I think my design work kind of came as this kind of, as a natural function of me kind of creating little apps and me not wanting them to look like crap. And so I kind of naturally started getting into, UI design type stuff. Right. And so I'd say that if at all I have any sort of design sense, it's in addition to my engineering background. And so now is kind of the point in my career where I'm trying to actually flesh out more of that design side. So I'd say to me, it's really just been a dual passion. I don't really think about design or development as kind of one of the things that I have to choose or whatever. So naturally, when the two meet, like especially in the case of little Android apps like Muzei and Dashclock, when those two things meet, it's great. It's just a lot of fun for me. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, and I guess you probably know that in most cases, design and development are two separate people. So what do you think about that relationship and just how the two work together?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, traditionally, we can go on and on about like how there's been the traditional waterfall process, and like now it's more integrated. I kind of feel like, in an ideal environment, in an ideal situation, two people, designer, developer, maybe like, some combination of the two. It's really not really the person, or like it's more like the hats that people wear. So the design side of a person, the engineering side of a person, they can just kind of be working at the same time, right? As long as the same set of people that are working on a project or product are working on the same thing at the same time, and doing as much as they can in parallel, I feel like that's going to be the best situation. I definitely feel like it's not a great situation when a developer doesn't do anything until a designer quote unquote is done, right, or does something, and then the designer kind of is quote unquote done, and then the developer starts doing stuff, and then the designer can like kind of go on to other tasks. I kind of feel like that's kind of a broken model, because then the designer has to kind of context switch back into their, the way they were thinking and their approach when they were working very, very deeply on that problem. And so I think in general, as much as possible, if both hats of people can be kind of working at the same rate, doing the same kind of, working on the same project, same sub-project, same little feature, I feel like that's just going to be the best option. There's obviously that's not a miracle solution. There's no kind of silver bullet answer, but I feel like that's just a general model that people should try to follow.
Yeah, and I feel like probably constant communication between the two is critical. So, for example, if I give a design to a developer and, I can't just say this is the final design, so do it, because there are constraints, obviously, programmatically and technically, that might make the design impossible or might require changes. Or, I feel like I've been fortunate to work with developers who also have a design hat as well. So they kind of get a sense of where the users are at and, if something might not work out well for them. So I guess, and part of that communication too is just from the developer side, maybe saying, hey, here's some things we need to change, or here's like technical constraints, to the designer side saying, here's how this design is supposed to work, which I guess goes back to kind of tooling and like prototyping and showing like the designer's way of communicating how something's supposed to work to the developer. Well,
to your point, one thing I think you brought out really well is that, a developer should be able to contribute, design ideas and design solutions. I think that's something that's really important. Not only a developer, but a product manager, a marketing person, and obviously, most importantly, users in research, right? If you kind of do the research, whatever type of research you do, the most important feedback at the end of the day is from users. But I feel like the designer's job is to take all these inputs from your own brain, from developers, from product managers that have specific ideas and kind of requirements, and from users as well, and to take all that and aggregate it and form kind of an end result. And so I feel like the job of the designer is not only to kind of do the mock-ups and wireframes and so on, but it's also to kind of curate the feedback and curate the ideas. And so when a developer says, hey, I think this way would work really, much better, designers have to be, I guess not really humble enough, but kind of accepting enough to say, that actually might work better. But then to take that and really think about it, see if it fits into the overall system, into the overall framework, the overall vision. And if it does, then yeah, that's the solution. You kind of go from there. So it's almost like the designer is chief curator of the experience to me. Right. But yes, let's talk about tooling. Prototyping, tooling. So design communication. How do you well, for all the different apps that you've worked on, like what kinds of communication tools do you use? I mean, just in terms of basics, like software.
So for communication, a lot of the developers I work with are not here in New York. So I use a lot of Slack and Hangouts to communicate that way. As for like creating the actual design mockups or assets, I lean heavily on Illustrator and After Effects for static and motion respectively. I've been trying to get myself to switch to Sketch for a long time now because I love Zeppelin, which is a tool where you kind of export your artboards into Zeppelin, and through some magic or another, it tells you all of the measurements in density independent pixels, and then it can cut out certain assets and put together colors and fonts and everything for you. So that's benefit enough for me to keep trying to adapt to Sketch, but I'm not 100% there yet. And I'm trying to pick up some of these new prototyping tools. Like I feel like there's an explosion of tools for motion and interaction prototyping now that will be really important soon.
Yeah, absolutely. On the point of of Zeppelin, so Zeppelin and other tools, I recently actually came across a tool called Simply. I think it was at DroidCon NYC. One of the founders gave me a demo. It's also really, really awesome. But tools like Zeppelin and Simply, basically tools that let designers kind of change their artifacts, change the artifact from a static mock or an annotated mock. God, I hate creating annotated mocks. It's so frustrating. But some tool that lets you kind of change the format, change the way that design is articulated to developers is much needed. I don't think we've actually like found the right tool. I don't think Zeppelin and Simply and those kinds of tools are sufficient. And certainly, I mean, like, you know, just cutting assets automatically and creating colors and fonts, that's one thing, right? But like understanding patterns, right? Understanding the deep interactions that are behind your static mocks, right? That stuff is hard. And so I feel like that's the stuff where prototyping can really help, right? If ideally a developer or a designer would be able to say in Sketch or whatever, or Illustrator, whatever it is, like, hey, this thing, this rectangle over here, or this layer is a set of tabs, right? Or this is a view pager, you know, a side-to-side pager, or this is a navigation drawer, or even better yet, somehow through some magical means, be able to kind of create your own interaction sheet, and then in your, I guess, in your static mocks, be able to say, hey, these layers, this layer, this corresponds to this exact interaction pattern, and then the developer somehow kind of gets that back in an actually an interesting way, not just like a little annotation that has a little arrow and says this is a view pager. Like, I don't know what that is, but I feel like if a designer can start communicating not just visual styling, because Zeppelin is great at that, right? But deeper interaction meaning and like the actual underlying, almost like interaction structure of the static mocks. I feel like that is a tool that would be really, really helpful.
Yeah, and I think outside of like fully fledged prototypes, the best tool that we have right now is motion sketches and poetic language to explain how things work.
Yes. Yeah, and like I also like the idea of, I mean, so After Effects is awesome, right? I mean, if you want to really, really neatly in a very short kind of, you know, 3-second long, you know, MOV file, really convey the exact kind of choreography between states, that's really cool. But I feel like to me, what's almost more interesting is the overall flow, right? So like being able to, you know, lay out your different states or different contexts and link them up, and then kind of talk about, or not really talk about, but like, I guess visually articulate what are the state changes. That's something that would be really awesome. So like tools like Framer, tools like even like simple tools like Keynote, the fact that like at a very basic level, each slide can be a different state, right, and you can use Magic Move and other transitions to get between different slides, and you can have like link targets that take you to different slides. Like that basic thing is actually kind of useful and interesting to me.
Right, because I think the other way of doing it, where you have static or even motion sketches, is kind of, I guess you can compare it to watching over someone's shoulder as they use the app, or getting still frames of what the experience is like, but it's not really conveying the deeper experience, which I think is important when you're actually implementing it as well. For sure.
So actually I have this ideal tool in mind. So I've actually sort of been working on like a tool, more like a coding library of sorts. So I'm guessing you've heard of Framer, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been working on like this Framer-like thing, but the idea is that like, and I won't talk too much about it, but like the basic idea is that, you know, every member of the team should be able to contribute to a prototype in some way. Is even designers that aren't familiar with code, right? You know, the whole conversation about should designers code, whatever. But I mean, if a designer can code, they should be able to. If not, then they should not be forbidden from participating in that process. So this little tool that I've been working on kind of follows this idea that I have of like, let a designer that can or can't code, whatever, you know, do something, create something, whether it be in Sketch and Illustrator, you know, create an artifact from that, like a set of exported PNG layers or a JSON or a file or whatever it is. And then let either designers that can't code, other designers that can code, or developers or prototypers, whatever it is, take that and actually, you know, start, you know, building on top of it, actually linking it together using some sort of prototyping language. And then potentially also empower the designers that can't code to kind of get started a little bit, not necessarily like have to jump in and write, you know, CoffeeScript or JavaScript or whatever, but at least do something, at least be able to annotate, like say, this should be, you know, a navigation drawer, and have that somehow magically work. So just in general, I really think that there needs to be some sort of tool or set of tools. It doesn't have to be one tool. Some sort of tool that really lets everybody participate. people that can code, people that can't, even PMs, marketing people, like they should be able to fork the prototype. Like a PM should be able to fork a prototype. Be like, you know what, I really think that we should do things this way, and it should somehow still work. Like they should be able to fork it, tweak things, you know, move things around the screen, and it should somehow still be able to work.
Right.
So I don't know. I guess it's some magical thing that hopefully will one day exist.
Yeah, and I think that would be helpful too, because like you said about curating feedback, curating something concrete that someone has actually worked on physically is a lot easier than kind of curating and translating vague or verbal or even written feedback.
Yeah, it's. I've been in a couple of meetings recently, and nothing against these PMs. I love the PMs that I'm working with right now, but it's always like, oh, you know, what if we do it this way? Can we see a mock of that? Like, can we see a mock of that? Like, well, I kind of wish that they could kind of create the mock of that. And honestly, the big difference is not necessarily, you know, your visual sensitivity and all that. I'll say one of the big differences why PMs can't always kind of create the mock for that is just because they're less familiar with the tools. You know, there's some PMs that are super familiar with Illustrator and Photoshop and Sketch, and like it's kind of easy for them to kind of mix and match and a little kind of remix what you've already done. But I feel like that's something that they should be empowered to do. So I totally agree. I think it's much easier to, and it's actually just a better use of designers' time not to mock out every single possible combination, to have other people participate in that process.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess moving on from that, I guess we can talk more specifically about your work in Android. Well, what you're able to talk about anyway.
Sure.
So Marshmallow's coming up.
Yeah.
I think I've talked about this with every guest I've had so far, but Marshmallow's coming up. Exciting stuff. What is it that you're most excited about?
I'm going to be really cheesy. Well, not really cheesy, but like this is going to be a super lame answer, but I just don't care. Window light status bar. That's like the one thing that I'm really excited by.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I've always been like a kind of a visual right now I'm doing a lot of interaction design. And the distinction is, you know, whatever, but I've traditionally been far more interested in visual design, like the exact visual appearance of something, right? The exact pixels. And it's, you know, I love when developers and designers have more flexibility. To me, it's, you know, constrained flexibility, not just flexibility for flexibility's sake, but I think that, you know, being able to tweak the, you know, the status bar color, have lighter status bar colors and have like darker icons, that's a really subtle, simple change that's, you know, pretty easy to kind of have a backward compatibility story for. But I think it can really let designers play around with things just a little bit more. And so I'm really excited by the window light status bar for some crazy reason.
So I have to say, we have this option in Nova, if you have a light wallpaper, to have the light mode for the status bar. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, what are some applications that you can imagine or have seen of this? Well,
I think, first of all, any brand that has a pretty bright primary color. So Genius is one that comes to mind. I don't think that they're using this yet, but Genius is one that comes to mind. So they're like pretty bright yellow. So you could imagine like they have to use a pretty dark shade of yellow in the status bar for the icons to be visible, to be legible. And so I think this should open up that possibility for them to potentially do something like, you know, still use like a 600 value of a yellow and have, you know, the icons visible on top of it. So that's one example. And again, I have no clue if they're going to do that or not. Any sort of news app, to me, like I've always liked this idea of like an app that has almost no Chrome, an app that is just all content, right? And if your content is white, is just like has a white background, I think it would be pretty natural to have just a slightly darker status bar and, you know, darker icons for that.
Okay, but the status bar would still be darker than the surrounding content.
It'll be slightly darker, right? So it's like we're talking about like a, you know, FFF or like a F2 versus like a DDD or like an EEE or something for the status bar. So it'd still be pretty bright. It'd be like a super light gray. So there'd still be that contrast, but it would be slightly less contrast. So I don't know. I think that to me is one interesting thing. I honestly don't know what people will do with it. Like I think that there are lots of interesting explorations. Here's another example. Actually, I was messing around with this as soon as like I saw the API become available internally. Maps, right? So right now you have for like satellite view, like the map is generally pretty dark. For for road view, the map is actually pretty light, right? It's overall like a light colored map, and you can obviously style things and so on. But you could imagine that if you don't want too much contrast between the status bar and the map, you could have a lighter, kind of like a light scrim for the status bar, and then have the darker status bar icons on top of it. So it's just another example, but like I don't know. I think this is not a rational thing. This is not like a rational thing for me to be obsessed over, but it's just one of those things that like as soon as I saw it, I was like hell yeah.
Yeah, but it's opening up those constraints just that much more.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think that a light mode will come to the nav bar? Or this is something that I'm obsessed with, is the nav bar and the fact that you can theme the nav bar, but I think it's almost never appropriate.
Yeah.
But do you see a light mode coming to that, or do you see a reason for that to happen, or should the nav bar be kind of this immutable system UI piece?
To me, it's the nav bar. Like, I don't know. I feel like it can. I mean, sure, it probably would make sense for the nav bar to be, for you to have like a light nav bar and like a darker actual nav icons. To me, the most important thing, like one of the reasons that we try not to do too much of the nav bar is because it is like one of those ingrained anchors, right, in the user's mental model of how to use their system, their app, their phone rather. And so like the more we change it and the more a developer tweaks it, like the less confidence a user builds over time with how to interact with their device. So that's just the general reason that we try not to do too much. And actually, one of the things I said like many years ago, one of the things I asked of the Android UX team was, hey, so like why don't we make the nav bar more contextual? Like why wouldn't we make the back button more contextual? So if it would do something, then have it appear. If it wouldn't do anything, then like grayed out or whatever it is, right? And their basic response was like, well, yeah, we explored that, and like first of all, research findings, don't lie, or it's always good to pay attention to research. And so, I think that some of the research they did basically kind of told them that they should be a little bit they should try to be a bit conservative with that. So I think over time, we can start, playing around with it more. But they basically said, yeah, we're just not quite ready to explore that. This is like let's try this for now. Let's try kind of keeping it simple for now.
Right.
And I'm sure like their thinking has changed. Again, I haven't talked to them in a couple of years about this, but I do think that there's value in giving designers and developers a bit of control. Not necessarily change the interaction model, probably not at all change the interaction model, but little bits of visual control I think are useful.
Right.
Having said that, I'm personally not a huge fan of like colored nav bar, like branded nav bars, because it's like not really part of the app. Right. In the same way that the status bar isn't part of the app, but the status bar, like it's a little, maybe it's like a little bit better. It's a little bit easier to do that, but
I think the status bar is more dynamic, and I think I've definitely had to explain to a lot of people the distinction between back and up on Android, which is also a back arrow. So, going to the last screen that you saw versus going up one level in whatever app you're looking at. But yeah, I do think that the status bar is more dynamic, and so it lends itself easier to the app than the nav bar.
Yeah, but like to answer your question, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do hope that we at some point provide add a little bit of dynamism, at least visual dynamism, like in addition to I guess the coloring of the nav bar, just some additional stuff that you could do with it.
Right. So maybe that's elevation or something.
Yeah. I don't know.
So is there anything else for Marshmallow? I know that there's a lot of motion. So here's something that I do want to ask about is the dark mode that was in the first preview. And I think this is something that was also an L, but only activated for certain circumstances. Yeah. Like if you were connected to a dock or something, then...
This has been in there for a while. The resource qualifier has been in there for a very long time. Yeah.
Which would switch an app to its dark mode if it supported that. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like it might make that more of like a front-facing feature.
I'll be very honest, I don't really know the story. I wasn't too deep into those discussions. To me, like, I mean, that is the little bit of theming that makes a lot of sense, because I mean, your experience using a phone or using a tablet, you know, in a movie theater, which actually you shouldn't be using one in a movie theater, but you know, using it in bed at night with the lights off is pretty different than using it out in the sun, or using it, you know, like just in a normal, you know, a well lit environment. So I think that there's some merit. Obviously, there's some decent reasons to do that type of thing. Now, like, whether or not it'll ever be like a user visible, you know, system wide preference or not, I don't really know. So yeah, I think it makes sense for a class of apps. Like, I don't think every single app needs that type of thing, but I think it makes sense for a class of apps. Obviously, reading apps makes a lot of sense. And certainly another thing that we'd have to think about is like, you know, do we have, you know, data that shows that yes, people would understand that there's a system-wide setting and not an in-app setting, right? Like, do users actually prefer like an in-app type of switch? And also, would they potentially want to, you know, have one app in dark and another app in light mode? So my guess, and again, this is a complete guess, my guess is that we just didn't have enough evidence to show that it would be a useful thing.
Right.
So I don't really know.
And I think getting that kind of data is probably hard, right? Especially when you have kind of ingrained behaviors that apps have made themes part of their own settings for so long that you know, users might already expect that, or expect it to be present in the app itself. But yeah, I guess I would draw the distinction between theming for night mode versus theming in general, as one is reacting to the reality of when you're using your device,
right, and
the other one's not.
Yeah, one is a very like a useful. It's actually like gonna drive engagement. It's gonna drive like the word performance and any kind of measure of the word, like, you know, how much people enjoy not really enjoy the experience, how well they can kind of, you know, process the things that are going on their device, right? One is actually a functional thing. The other, I feel like, is pretty cosmetic, and not to, I don't want to kind of like completely dismiss cosmetic theme changes that users would request or whatever. I don't want to dismiss that entirely, but I do feel like there's something to be said about, you know, making visual decisions and sticking to those decisions. The same reason why, you know, you generally don't want to offer a million different preferences. You know, you don't want to, you know, for the small class of users that really care about that stuff, you know, sure, they're missing out on some things, and potentially you can add like a backdoor for them, you know, for preferences and so on, like for the hackers out there, right? But for the majority of users, and I guess this is for the majority of, you know, consumer apps. Certainly there are some classes of apps that this is different for, but for the majority of consumer apps, like, most users don't care. They don't want to care. Like, they're never going to open settings. They're never going to choose a theme, right? Especially like when that theme dilutes your brand. You know, when you know, I think these days it's pretty important to stand out. It's pretty important to have like a very specific kind of message and brand that users can kind of, you know, grow with over time and so on. When you start diluting that by letting them kind of mess around with theme colors and so on, it's, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just like it can be a can of worms.
Right. So I guess for the general audience, the best thing is to make strong, informed design decisions and stick by that. Absolutely.
At the same time, again, like, this is up to every developer out there,
right,
up to every designer out there. Like, it's the beauty about it is that this is your product, or like this is the thing that you're building. So you can do whatever you want with it. You can, you know, make great design choices. You can make horrible design choices. You can kind of choose to include certain features. You can choose to omit them. That's kind of one of the most amazing things about it, is like, there's no right answer to these things. Like, there's no, it isn't valid to say you like theming or allowing theming of your app is incorrect or is wrong. It's just not right. You know, it's really up to you as a developer, designer, as a product owner, whatever it is, to make that decision for your apps, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So, and that's something else, is it depends on the individual product. And I guess that's something that interests me too, is how big of a role designers have in product. And I'm sure that this is different at a company like Google than it would be for somebody like me working with indie devs one-on-one, to influence what the product is like. But how does that kind of play out in your experience?
So I've only been like deeply in the product UX and Eng kind of cycle at Google, for a few months actually. So before that, again, like I was doing mostly design advocacy stuff. I was, doing my own design, my own development and everything, and then like kind of sharing that with the world. So I don't have the largest amount of experience in this area, but I'd say that, from what I've heard at Google at least, UX was, I don't want to say afterthought, but UX for a while was an understood thing that we needed. But at the end of the day, like, engineers and product management, but primarily engineers who kind of make some of the larger decisions. I think these days there's a ton of respect for UX, a ton of respect for design, UX. Actually, what's most interesting to me is there's a huge amount of respect for UX research. And that's something that, like, I think actually before, like, visual design, interaction design was really, really valued. I think Google always valued data, and so UX research is one of the best kind of providers of data. Right. I think that has always been a very positive thing. But somewhat recently, other disciplines within UX, especially motion design too, has become like super important. So these days, I mean, I've seen conversations where a designer will tell a product manager, and I haven't been this bold just yet, because again, it's kind of a new team, new product. But I've seen the situations where designers tell the product manager, hey, this doesn't make sense. Like, as not even like, I can't design this, or I can't like create a good design for this. Like, this whole concept does not make sense. Like, not to invalidate the entire product, but like, right. Major product decisions, right? And so I've seen those types of things happen. I think also one of the reasons for that is because our designers are not only getting more credibility and all that, but they're just really smart. Like, they're just getting much smarter. Like, the people that we're hiring, the people that have that have started amassing these teams within Google for UX, these people are really smart. Like, these are some of the brightest people that I've talked to, and so like the justification, the rationale behind these things, it's hard to argue with, right? So I think in general, it's been definitely an upward trend, and so I think these days, like, designers are very, very deep into product decisions. At the same time, like, this varies per team, right? Like, just like with any largish company, each team is going to operate a little differently. Each team is going to have its own personalities. So that's definitely something that I think that designers in general just still have to work on, is being outspoken and having opinions and speaking those opinions. Right, and backing them off with data, hopefully. Absolutely. That's the best thing to do. Is actually, this is great because, like, for this product I'm working on, we just finished a round of research, and it was just so refreshing to go into a meeting and, like, PMs and engineers and designers are arguing about something, and then, like, actually mentioned, so yeah, this just didn't work in research. Like, our research found this wouldn't work, and like, that's end of story. You just slam the papers on the table. Yeah, it's just like, look, it's like, we can debate this all we want, right? But at the end of the day, if in a statistically significant way or whatever, if our target audience doesn't understand something, like, at the end of the day, that's really the only thing that matters. Right. And I think we can see that coming through in a lot of Google's products, including, an uptrend in server-side tests, A/B testing, and everything. I feel like at some point in the future, it's going to be impossible for us to write about Google updates anymore, because we won't know if something's server-side or testing or if it's final. But that's great, though. Well, the interesting thing there is, like, so like there's experiments going on all the time. There's like A, B, C, D, E, F, G testing and so on. But I actually think that you're right for a slightly different reason. I think it'll be hard to write about like a piece of software and like how it looks and how it works, because software will adapt to the user so much that, like, the way you use Gmail or Google search or Facebook or Twitter or anything, right? The way you use it is actually going to be pretty different in some big ways to the way I use it, to the way my wife uses it, to the way like anybody else uses it. And so I feel like that is something where, not necessarily artificial intelligence or whatever, but like, that's a massively unexplored part of the design and product development process is like, how can we actually make apps more contextual?
Right.
And so I feel like, yes, you're going to be writing an article and you're going to be like, oh my God, check out this new thing. And then everybody's going to be like, wait, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, I haven't seen this. And you'll be like, wait, it's because I don't know, I did this thing recently and now all of a sudden, like, this thing, works for me.
Right. So the article is going to be for people who refresh their email at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday.
Yes.
Then you've got a new feature waiting for you.
At the same time, and I can rant about this all day, so I'll be very brief. At the same time, I think I also recently, super recently, but like I've come to understand and like appreciate the difficulty with which users, experience change. So like you don't want to do things too harshly. Like, so if one day you're using Gmail or Google search or whatever, and it's one thing, and then the next day it's like completely different, like, oh, try out the new whatever it's called, right? The new version. If it's completely different, it kind of can erode trust and like can erode your confidence, not only in the company, but in yourself. And so I feel like there's a balance to be striked or stricken or whatever. There's a balance there where you want to make iterative changes. You want to make lots and lots of iterative contextual changes that don't alienate people at the same time.
Right. So it's kind of, what would the design process for that be? Something so organic that you can't possibly design for every permutation and the steps in between, right? So there must be some system of adaptations, I guess.
So like this is kind of the same problem that we have now, like just on steroids. Like the problem we have now as designers is we don't really have great tools for doing adaptive design, like where you can kind of, like in Sketch or in Illustrator, you can't just resize the artboard and like all of the stuff in there just naturally just adapts to everything. That would be kind of cool though. And there are some tools that try to do this and so on, but that's like one basic form of adaptive design. But like when adaptive design really becomes more not just about adapting to browser width or screen size on Android or to different languages or whatever, when it really becomes more about adapting to context and adapting to like user experience, user history and stuff like that, I feel like we're just going to need completely new tools. And so in a sense, I kind of like the best tools we have now are just programming languages. And so like, designers who are able to code will probably have a leg up when this becomes like a major thing. And so I do, hope that everybody out there, any designers listening, if you haven't, taken a basic JavaScript, tutorial, right, just try it. Like it's worth it. But I feel like we're just going to need new tools. We're going to need new tools that can just not only visualize each of these unique states, and these massive sets of these huge permutations of states, but can also let you iterate really quickly, right? Like that feedback loop needs to be tight. So like switch into state 1.2.5.9.10, whatever that means, and then like make a little tweak here, and then switch to another state, see the changes. And so I feel like there's just a million different things you're gonna have to deal with as a designer. So we're gonna need new tools. It's gonna be a lot harder. And we're screwed.
But I'm just imagining like, once it's decided that you're in state 1, 2, 5, 10, etc., that things, because right now, so going back to the browser window thing, right now, the best we can do is have breakpoints and things kind of transform linearly-ish from that. But there must be steps in between. So yeah, that's...
It's the in-between states.
Right.
It's definitely the in-between states. And like, we talked about, 1, 2, 5, 9, and so on. Like that kind of implies these discrete boundaries and like these, almost like a discrete decision tree. But I don't even know if that's going to be the case. Like, I don't know if it's like based on your level of your vision, for example, how impaired your vision is. Maybe there's a continuum of font sizes, for example, or a continuum of layout decisions that fall out from underneath that. So I don't really know. It's kind of hard thinking about it because like we're not quite there yet. All I know is that right now we don't do a great job of being contextual with every user. Like we basically try to design for every user, right? Like we try to have one design for, you know, 1 million or you know, a couple of million or like 100,000, however many large number of users. We think that not one static mock, but like one design is sufficient. And it's just a flawed argument.
Right, because you can't take 1 million users and kind of average them into one persona that app works for. And being contextual doesn't necessarily mean presenting different information, but actually adapting the whole experience to who happens to be using the app.
Exactly.
But I feel like, yeah, going back to in-between states, it's like one day we will have this awesome system and all of these tools and everything, but what happens between now and then? Like, where do you see the progression going to that, I guess?
Well, I do think that there's going to be like just iterative innovations, right? Like I think the first is just better design tools, and like there's so many awesome people right now working on design tools. So there are a lot of people at Google doing awesome things in the design tooling space. A lot of people at Facebook and at Adobe especially, lots and Vision. Like there's some great stuff happening in the space, and I definitely foresee like those improvements over time, and like potentially, you know, some larger scale improvements, some like big innovations. I potentially see those leading the way to changing how the design process works. Like you asked about design process, right? Like imagine all of a sudden, you know, or maybe not all of a sudden, over the course of like 4 releases of a tool that we already know of, like we are now faster and better and able to do these things. Like for example, imagine like Photoshop layer comps on steroids. Like Photoshop does something like Adobe does something crazy, and like layer comps become somehow like, I don't know, just incredibly smart, right? Not just like different layers hiding in different points. So I can imagine like a basic technical, not really breakthrough, but like a technical innovation like that, igniting inspiring a whole bunch of designers and developers too to start thinking of problems, their current problems in slightly different ways. Not only making them faster, but just not completely, but like somewhat changing the way in which you kind of like think about your process. And then like that leading to those bigger innovations in product. So just to summarize, I feel like there's going to be like some major innovations in design tooling over the next couple of years or however long it is. And those little innovations, big innovations, will change the way designers and developers approach their process. And by virtue of that, that'll open up the door to a whole lot of new things, like this kind of like super adaptive design process and super adaptive products, I guess.
Yeah, so major changes on, for some reason, the example I always think of is Illustrator breaking out of the non-preview mode version back when it was only the wireframe. Preview mode wasn't a thing. Now if you press Control-Y, you can go back to that nightmare scape.
Oh my god, is that the super like the outline view?
Yeah, just outlines, no colors or anything.
So this was like I actually never understood like what this was for. Like so I don't have like a print design background, so I just have no clue. I know that like a lot of people that I've talked to in the print world have showed me stuff that looked like this, that looked like outline only mode. Is there a reason for outline only mode? What is it?
Previously, my understanding is that it was a technological limitation of drawing colors or textures on the screen at the scale that Adobe Illustrator allows you to do it. But now, wow. I think it's a legacy thing. I use it if I need to like figure out where a certain point is, if there's something like hiding behind another object or something.
That's a great idea.
But yeah, so that kind of change of going from like wireframe only to actually seeing what you're doing in real time before you print it out.
It's a new horizon, right? Like, right. I mean, before this was possible, like it's almost like it's like motion pictures, right? Like you start with static photos or static pictures, right? And then you don't really think much about it. And then there's this little innovation, that happens where you basically play a set of, static pictures at a fast enough rate that physiologically like maps with how you understand motion, or how you process motion. And then all of a sudden you have literally a moving picture, right? And so like that opens up a whole new world of things that you can do creatively. Right, so it's the same thing here, right? Like it's you basically like you don't even understand, you don't realize that you can like work in full color and like WYSIWYG, right? You can actually work in almost the exact final product, or in the exact final asset format. And so I feel like it's the same thing. Like imagine one day you're on your Android phone as a designer, and you're literally like moving things around on your Android phone, and that is how you design for Android. Like that would be, I think there's tools that sort of do this already, but like, not really in a backwards way, but like not in a very easy to use way. But yeah, like imagine that is the way Android design or iOS design is in the future. It's just like, it's literally not only what you see is what you get, is what you hold and what you drag and what you touch is what you get.
Right. So it'll take us kind of how the static image from there. Now we can record videos on our cell phones whenever we want. It'll be the same kind of, from wireframe Illustrator mode all the way to you're actually making the thing on your device right now.
Exactly.
It's pretty cool.
It's a bold future we live in.
Yeah.
Or we will be living in.
We look forward to. So the last episode I did was with Kevin, who is the developer of Nova Launcher, and we talked a little bit about the future of launchers and how people interact with those, and whether things are headed toward a psychic future, whether there will be more incremental steps of awkward prediction and things like that, or like where it's headed and how it will get there, I guess. So what's your perspective on that?
So I'm really looking forward to listening to this episode. Unfortunately, it hasn't aired at this point, so I can't comment on it. I'm very, very interested in launchers. Not because I want to build a launcher myself or anything. I just this hasn't like really hit home per se, but like maybe about a year ago I got my grandma, who's like 87, 88 or something. I got her a tablet, like some old Samsung Galaxy Tab, a 10-inch tablet, and I was trying to show her how to use the tablet, and I realized like it never really hit me that people with very low dexterity, very low kind of agility, and like also very low comprehension, she doesn't read or speak English, right? And I don't think that I was able to change the device into Russian for some reason. But I realized that like there were all these things, like the most basic things, like the back button, the home button, the recents button, the current time even, right? Like there are all these things that just like were getting in the way. Like they were completely irrelevant to what she wanted to do. Like literally the best user interface for her at that moment would be like a nice big fat solitaire icon, and she presses the solitaire icon and it opens full screen solitaire, and then somehow there's like a nice big fat button that says, okay, I'm done with solitaire, right? And so I think that that was just to illustrate this general point, which is I think that different people will be using launchers, not even launchers, will be using phones in different ways. The way you and I use a phone or a tablet is very different from the way my grandma should use a phone or a tablet. It's also very different from the way kids should be able to use their phone or tablet, and also very different from the way that like my wife, she's actually pretty technically savvy, like tech savvy, but not nearly as tech savvy as I am. It should be different from the way she experiences it. So I look at launchers as the gateway to your device, right? Like besides the system, the nav bar and the system status bar, like everything else when you first turn on the device and whatever is launcher, right? So to me, I think back to what we were talking about before, I definitely think that there's value in having like a completely super contextual adaptive launcher. I also think that there's value in the very short term, people iterating on what a launcher is, and not necessarily adding features. Because I mean, I think Kevin and Chris Lacey, like they're doing some awesome things in innovating like launchers for the majority of people, right? But I definitely think that there's a lot of value in people exploring launchers for subgroups. So launchers for grandparents, launchers for people with certain disabilities, like people that have poor vision, people that are not necessarily colorblind. I guess that's not really a huge thing as far as I know, but like people that are just have like different understandings and different like abilities, right? So I feel like there's something that you could do right now. Like tomorrow, a developer out there, designer out there could start designing an Android launcher for kids, and like when they publish it, that might be like really, really hot. Like that could be really awesome. So I think that entire space is ripe for innovation today. Now tomorrow and like, you know, in the future, who knows? Like I think that, you know, Nova Launcher, you know, Action Launcher, you know, Google Now Launcher, these things will probably be much more adaptive and flexible and so on. And so they may start covering more of those cases. But I definitely think in the short term, there's just like so ripe for innovation for different groups.
Right. So to your point about how designs are kind of relatively static and kind of evened out for that average user right now, I guess we've enjoyed the privilege of building these designs on this new tradition of mobile devices, like something that not so many years ago didn't exist. We didn't have a language for this. But designs right now are built out of that language and things that are building on top of that language. Where was I going with this?
Well, I think if I understand your point correctly, you know, interaction patterns, right? Like we built up these interaction patterns, you know, years ago, almost 10 years ago. Well, not really 10 years. Actually, probably longer than 10 years. We built up these interactions, like these things called tabs and these things called buttons and these things, you know, that are icons that represent this entity, and like sliding drawers and touch and drag, and like there's all this cool technology. And we can do so much with it, and we are doing so much with it. Like, you know, Apple's new, what is it, 3D Touch or whatever it is. Like that's like tons of new, like, stuff that you could do. Like, as a designer, as a developer, you can, you know, do some really cool things with that. Like, I haven't actually used it myself. I haven't tried it, but it's opening up, like, another plane, another dimension of you know, stuff that you can do, which is kind of cool. But I think that, you know, I think there may be a point where we go too far, where we make things so complex, like there's so many things that you have to like kind of understand as a user that it just stops making sense.
Right.
Like,
so I think where I was eventually going with that was people who missed out on that kind of foundation have a really big plate of vegetables to eat right now.
Absolutely.
Of catching up on all of these things as they build on top of each other and as they continue to build. And I think 3D Touch is an excellent example of that because it provides a new kind of feedback. I always want to compare it to long press because that's that's just what I think of is long press, but instead it's hard press, and it provides this awesome new kind of feedback. But it is going to be weird for users, both in terms of like knowing what it is and also just knowing that it exists. And the discovery process of finding out where this works and where it doesn't, and you know, just exploring that for everybody, not even just for people who missed the first course. But yeah, it is interesting how we might unwind that or reel it in so that people who have not been around, like have not had technology their whole life or aren't up to speed with how the latest iPhone works, can still pick up a device and know what they're doing and get accomplished the tasks that they want.
Yeah, so I would argue, so I totally agree. I would argue that we don't need all these new fancy things. Like, I think that for the most part, and this is like a bold statement, I don't know, like I'm just you know, thinking about this, but like if you can't accomplish the basic set of things that you want with just pretty elementary gestures, with really elementary stuff, then you should probably rethink what you're doing, right? Like I'm just imagining like a designer that's working on iOS, and I don't really do iOS design, so I don't know, right? And I actually haven't tried the new iPhone, like I don't know what 3D Touch is gonna be like. I know that it really scares me. It's like kind of crazy that designers and developers are all of a sudden gonna have like all this new stuff to play with. And I could just totally see an iOS designer or you know, somebody that's just messing around with stuff, just saying, okay, well, in this app, you know, just tapping will do this, long press will do this, double press will do this, hard touch or hard press, whatever, will do this. And it's like, oh, that's really cool. Let's go with that, right? And not only that, but like the reality is that, you don't own the entire experience of that device. Like, neither does Apple. Apple doesn't own the entire experience of the device, just like Google doesn't own the entire Android user experience, not by a long shot, right? Like, there's all these third-party apps, there's all these other things that are in play. And so, for a user to really have a cohesive experience, you would need everybody involved, like all the developers that are making all the apps on that phone, or that tablet, and you need all the OEMs and all the different software manufacturers. You need all these people to be on the same page, and I feel like that is really scarily hard. And so I feel like, let's actually give ourselves collectively as designers like a more constrained environment. Let's actually do less. Let's require less. And so I kind of, part of me almost wishes we could go back to the days of like, I just have this basic touch screen and I can like touch things and swipe them around and that's it. And even that, like, I mean, for, basic swipe is easy, but like the whole swipe and then do something else while you're swiping and then lift your finger and do something else. That's just like, that's kind of nuts. That's kind of crazy.
Right. So yeah, just reeling it in, trying to place more constraints, which I guess is what design advocacy is about, right?
Absolutely.
Am I correct?
It's all about, honestly, like the best design has a lot of constraints. Like it fits beautifully within a very well understood, like well-defined set of constraints. I think that as developers, as designers, as people as people that have to design things for other people, I think we just need to really, really appreciate those constraints, and really appreciate that, like, we need to do fewer cool things and more things that are just actually valuable and work and that people will understand. Right. So like I've given up making beautiful things and like amazing things just for for that sake. I think it's much more important to spend our time making things that people will actually use.
And there can be beauty in simplicity. There's definitely no saying that that something that is simple enough to be, only its essence and the things that it needs can't be beautiful at the same time. Yeah,
I want something to be beautiful in its simplicity, not beautiful in its just raw beauty.
Right. Not ostentatious. Design.
Exactly.
So yeah, I guess that wraps it up for this episode.
Liam, this has been an absolutely, to me at least, awesome conversation. It's been totally riveting. I would love to come back at some point.
Yeah, of course.
It's been really fun.
Anytime.
Cool.
So, all right, thanks.
All right, see ya.